Check it out. It's the Laugh to Learn podcast. What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Laugh to Learn podcast, your weekly source for a fun spin of all the goings-on in the news. My dog Benny just ran away from me once I started the intro, so perhaps you should do the same. Maybe that's a sign of things to come. My name is, as always, Jacob Paveo, and I come to you, of course, from the Great White North each and every Wednesday afternoon, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, fresh for download to listen to the entire world around. And today it is snowing and raining all at the same time, so not a great weather day in this area. The dog came in covered in ice and snow, so I'm sure everyone out there listening in the region is experiencing some of the same. I hope if you do have to drive to work that you, or perhaps you're listening on the way home from work today on Wednesday, and you are safe and secure in that endeavor. Speaking of driving, I mean, it goes without saying, we have to talk about these truckers, because that is the story. It is making international headlines, going through the news this weekend, not even preparing for the show, but just over the weekend. And I'm seeing BBC UK talk about this. There's a few French outlets that were reporting on this. I saw an Israeli news outlet reporting on this. It is everywhere. Everyone is talking about the Canadian truckers who are not happy about vaccine mandates. And it goes without saying that this is obviously way bigger an issue than just a Canadian issue. And I think that's why it's getting so much coverage, because certainly Canada, we have to be one of the top 5 countries when it comes to how restricted we are due to COVID. But in the big picture, if you really zoom out, most modern countries do now have some forms of restrictions in place. So it's sort of an odd situation where what's being demanded by this protest is a complete removal of restrictions regarding vaccines, which actually goes further than the United States allows, because businesses in the U.S. can mandate vaccines as well in some states. Any government officials are mandated to have vaccines and stuff. So the complete removal of any restrictions would actually be going farther than basically any other allied, at least, modern nations. But that being said, let's get into it. So if you didn't already know, which you should know, because I talked about it last week on the podcast, and it's everywhere. I don't know how you don't know, but a large convoy of trucks from BC, the Vancouver area, started driving to Ottawa. By the time they got to Ottawa, there was about 5,000 vehicles at its peak. And it wasn't just transport trucks. There were SUVs and cars and vans and buses and motorhomes and everything you could imagine got involved in this. And when they came through our area here, I think I talked about it last week, that the highways, the off-ramps were closed and the on-ramps were closed, so no one could get on the highway, and the cops basically just let them pass through, and it was rather uneventful. And when they got to the Toronto area, they slowed down and kind of delayed traffic. The Toronto area police forces did the same thing that they did here, where they just kind of closed all the highway ramps so that traffic was not allowed to enter or exit the highway while they went through, basically to stop them from getting off and doing anything crazy, which didn't happen. But, the police did their thing. It caused some congestion, but the thing was they drove through the area in the middle of the afternoon, which has no impact on anything, right? If they had chose to come through during rush hour, like they should have come through 6, 7, 8 in the morning, then they would have had an impact in the Toronto area, but they didn't do that. So poor planning from an activist's point of view. I would have definitely given them better advice than they accepted. But that being said, they are now in Ottawa, and they have been there for nearly a week now. We're approaching a week. I think it was last Thursday, because when the podcast went up on Wednesday, they were driving through this area, and I believe the following day, because they were driving slowly, right? I believe the following day they arrived in Ottawa. Usually it's about a 4.5-hour drive or so, maybe 5 hours, depending on traffic and weather, to get to Ottawa from here. But it took them a whole day. So they arrived about a week ago now, and they have basically just placed themselves around the Parliament area and the Old City Market. Ottawa is a really weird town or city to explain to people who've never been there and never really spent much time there, because downtown Ottawa is this tiny little postage stamp. It's this tiny little area that is surrounded by the canal on one side, which is the border with Quebec, and on the other side, it is surrounded by the Old Market, which is a much larger space around the downtown area, which then borders onto the highway. So it's really, really congested normally, under normal circumstances. It's a city that is compacted into this tiny little area, and then everything outside of that is not a city. It's kind of like the opposite of LA, where LA is just this, everyone is spread over this massive area. In Ottawa, everyone's crammed into this tiny little, 6-block radius. And then Parliament is on the other side of that. Now, strategically, Ottawa is quite clearly built with strategy and military in mind to protect the Capitol buildings, which is really clear, actually, if you go there. Of course, Ottawa is the second capital of Canada after we burnt down the White House in 1812 or 1813 or whatever it was. The Canadian Parliament was because Kingston is directly on the border. It is a border city with the U.S., and the Canadian Parliament was we should probably move. So they wisely packed up and moved about 2 or 3 hours modern drive, but much farther back in the 1800s, north of Kingston to Ottawa. Anyways, random history lesson. But the point is that the protests have been raging, if you could say that, for a week or so. Relatively mild, though. There's been some arrests. I have a news report here where 2 men earlier this week, actually, just on Tuesday, they were arrested. One charged with mischief. He actually wasn't arrested. He was just fined, and he will be he was summoned to court at a later date. And another, that was a 29-year-old man, and a 37-year-old man was charged and arrested with carrying a weapon to a public meeting. So here in Canada, even if you are a legal firearm owner, you are not allowed to bring said firearm to a public event such as a concert, a sporting event, a protest, anything of that sort. So obviously he was at the protest with a weapon. So that was removed from his person, and he has been charged with that. But otherwise, I mean, it's been relatively docile. There was some arrests late last week into the weekend because people were defacing and actually camping out on the War Memorial, which is located right across the street from the Parliament building. Of course, if you recall the 2016 terror attacks in Ottawa, the individual shot a soldier at the War Memorial before crossing the lawn and getting through the front doors of the Parliament building, where he was shot dead. So it's not far. If you haven't been there, it's not a far walk, right? Obviously, a guy was able to shoot and kill someone at the War Memorial and just stroll into the front door of the Parliament buildings. And so it's just my point is that it's not far away from Parliament. It's right around where they're protesting, and people were defacing as I said, the War Memorial and camping out there. And the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, did move in and arrest a few individuals and clear the space out, because of course it is the location of Canada's Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, which basically every allied country has a Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Essentially, it is unidentified remains that are buried in the capital city. There's a few different variations around the world, but it is one of, as far as a military site, it is definitely one of the most important Canadian military sites, maybe second only to Flanders in France, and maybe third if you include Vimy Ridge. But one of the most important sites for the Canadian military and military heritage. And so the RCMP moved in, kicked them out of there, and I haven't seen any reports that there's been any further issues. I've seen some images of people put signs on the Terry Fox statue. Definitely not as drastic as defacing the War Memorial. But otherwise, it seems like it's been relatively calm. Now, what they're asking for, what this protest is demanding, is lifting the restrictions for truckers to require for having requirement of vaccine to cross the border to come into Canada. That is a Canadian restriction they've placed on truckers. Now, I'm actually not opposed to that, especially if you can prove that there is no cross paperwork. So if it's all electronic paperwork and you don't need to get out of your truck at any business, I'm not necessarily against it. The one thing that's been said is that they have to get out of their trucks to refuel, to get food and stuff like that. I completely agree with you, but I think that that risk is exceptionally low, because they don't linger. Like, a truck driver isn't entering Canada or a Canadian truck driver also can't go to the U.S. and come back. So they're not lingering in these places. They're just driving and delivering. If they have to fill up their truck with fuel, or they grab food or something, the risk of that individual bringing COVID back into Canada, or bringing it into Canada if they're an American citizen, you have to imagine is relatively low. They definitely don't run into many people. So I'm actually quite sympathetic with the originating position of their argument. However, there is a lot that needs to be said about it, because ultimately there's the Trucking Association of Ontario. There's also a federal association of truck drivers, and every province has their own. And all of these groups, they're not unions, but they're member groups, have come forward and said that the vast majority of their members do not support this movement, so much so that the federal association actually said they believe that it's fewer than 4% of Canadian truck drivers who are actually involved, or not necessarily involved, but supporting this protest, and obviously far less, only 5,000 people, and so that's far less than 4% of the truckers in the country. But nonetheless, they are being exceptionally impactful by what they're doing, insofar that this is getting international coverage, and Justin Trudeau has shown everyone the vagina in him and fucked the hell off, saying he had a close contact with COVID, so he's going to the cottage. You may recall when his wife had COVID, that she was living in the same house as him, and now that he has a close contact with COVID, he got the fuck out of Ottawa. So that concerns me, because I think that the vast majority of Canadians today believe the bullshit that's being said about this group of protesters. Because, you know, it's come to my attention recently that politically it is exceptionally beneficial to label others being people who disagree with you, as extreme and willing to quite literally kill for their beliefs, when you obviously don't feel that way yourself. But they are extreme, and to add to that extremity, they're violent, they're rapists, they're murderers, they're killers, right? There's no way the vast majority of these protesters are rapists and murderers and racists and white supremacists. It's just statistically unlikely, because Canada has a relatively small population, and I think we talked about this on a podcast before with white supremacy, that the expected number of labeled white supremacists, like people like David Duke in the US, right? People who identify as white supremacists, in total in Canada, there's like 10,000. And I highly doubt that 50% of them came out for this protest. They probably support this protest, but they didn't show up for it, right? So it's just statistically, you start looking at things and saying, I don't know, man. Like, it doesn't add up. And the issue that I see here is, I think the Prime Minister has convinced himself, and the people around him have convinced themselves, that what they say about people who are against the vaccine is true. I think they truly believe that if you're against the vaccine, you are a sexist and a homophobe and violent. I think they actually believe that. And we've talked about the impact of words here on the podcast, right? Things like the word violence, right? They violently attacked me. When it's like someone called you a fucking idiot. And then they violently attacked me. No, they called you a fucking idiot, right? But common phrasing has changed so that when politicians are discussing other groups, they use similar language, colloquial language, like a violent group. Not meaning a group that will actually harm you, but meaning a group that will use aggressive language on the internet. And suddenly that spirals to now you have a protest with a group that online has been labeled as violent by the Liberal Party of Canada. They've been labeled as violent, and now the Liberal Party of Canada actually believes that in person, these individuals, all of them, the vast majority, are violent. So the Prime Minister needs to be removed from the downtown area to avoid said violence. And I think that's a serious problem, because how are you ever supposed to communicate with this group, figure out what they want, and come to any sort of a resolution if they are just violent, right? Cave people, demon spawn. There's nothing you can do. It removes... Here's the thing. The interesting thing to me is it does two things. One, it removes any possibility of some sort of a resolution, right? Number one. Number two, it removes the need to have any sort of resolution. So politically, you only have everything to gain by being able to successfully label a group as such, right? If you can say that group of people are animals and it's literally like trying to communicate with your dog, then you have no need to come to any sort of resolution. No one expects you to, none of your voters at least expect you to, and you can get away with completely ignoring it and waiting for the police to come in and arrest them all, or waiting for them to starve themselves out, like a castle siege in the 1600s. And that's what we're seeing. And I found exceptionally interesting. That's a really weird way to phrase it. But I found it exceptionally interesting what Jordan Peterson said last week, where he said, I don't understand why the Conservative Party of Canada and the Conservative Party of Ontario with Doug Ford and other Conservative politicians aren't jumping on this and making it so clear that, like, right now, and this poll has been going around and people are making fun of it, and I'm telling you, if you've made fun of it, you're wrong. You have no idea what's going on in the country because you don't follow it. But a poll has come out from Angus Reid, January 28th. They polled 1,688 people, which is a lot of people to answer a political questionnaire. That is a lot, okay? And I'm not making that up. That is statistically unlikely. Usually, like election polls in a municipal election, you might ask 30 people, and you can accurately predict within like 1 or 2% the polling of an entire city with 30 or 40 respondents. So 1,688 people were questioned, and the question was, quote, "It's time to end restrictions and let people self-isolate if they're at risk," end quote. And it was agree or disagree, and 54% of individuals agreed. 54% of Canadians agree that it is time to end restrictions and let people self-isolate if they're at risk. That was the question without any further explanation. Dr. Peterson is absolutely correct here when he says that the Conservative Party should be jumping on this. I'm not saying, and I don't believe he was saying, that the Conservative Party should align themselves with this trucker movement. I don't think that's the case. But they can certainly appease that trucker movement and come out and say, like Doug Ford can come out and say, I'm going to end all restrictions, and there's an election on June 2nd in Ontario, and all of the opposition parties want to support more restrictions, and I'm going to end them. Boom. 54% of Canadians agree with that. Now, we haven't seen Ontario-specific polling, but I bet you it's fairly in line. Ontario is typically more conservative than some other provinces, at least when it comes to provincial elections. Federal elections, because of the way they're district, we tend to poll Liberal. But it's just true that Ontario is overwhelmingly conservative. So if Canada as a whole is polling 54% to end regulations, you would assume the number would be higher here in Ontario. And it doesn't make sense why Doug Ford hasn't come out and said, yeah, we don't even mention the truckers' protest, but just come out and say that we think restrictions should be ended, and boom, huge political win. Instead, no. He backtracks, he backpedals, and he sounds like the NDP or the Liberal government. And it's just so bizarre. It's so bizarre for me sitting here just observing, because I thought when this protest was really taking off, like, oh, you know, the Conservatives have this one down, right? Justin Trudeau is running away from the capital. He's not even here to lead the country anymore because 5,000 guys in trucks are showing up, and that's enough to scare away our prime minister. He can't control his own, not his city, because he was elected in Quebec, but he can't control the capital city. And oh my God, could you imagine if this happened to an American president? Like, could you actually imagine if, like, tomorrow 5,000 protesters showed up in Washington and Biden ran away? There's no way he would get away with that politically. But Trudeau can, and the Conservatives aren't even making a comment about it. It's like, if I was in Doug Ford's position, I would have straight up, I know that Doug Ford's not running for federal office, but I would have straight up said, like, isn't it odd that, the Prime Minister lived in a house with his wife when she had COVID, and now that he's been exposed to COVID, he leaves Ottawa as if all of Ottawa is at risk because the Prime Minister may have been exposed to COVID-19, so he has to go to his cottage. You know how much that costs us for him to stay at his cottage? Like, there's all these questions that come up where it's like, it's so easy to go after him for this, and none of them are, because they're all afraid of the rhetoric that has been given to this protest and this group, and they're afraid of being associated with said rhetoric. Instead of facing it head on and saying, I don't agree with what they're doing, right? There are Nazi flags flying there. They defaced the tomb of the unknown soldier and the war memorial, and they did all this stuff. I don't agree with that. But that doesn't mean that vaccine mandates shouldn't be scaled back. It's just, and personally, like, I'm vaccinated, and I've said before, I don't give a shit. I don't care. I don't care about if vaccine mandates keep going or not because I'm vaccinated. I want to make that clear at this point. I'm not siding with this truckers' protest. To be honest, my vote in June will have nothing or very little likely to do with vaccine mandates. When it comes to business restrictions and capacity restrictions and stuff like that, that's where I have an issue. But, like, I have an issue with the fact that fully vaccinated people can't live life normally. That, I think, is taking things too far. But the Conservative government, provincial and federal, does not need to align with this group to say that, to say a similar thing, that we need to end these restrictions. But basically, this group seems to have politically done more for the Liberal parties than anything the Liberal parties have done in the past 7 years. I mean, in the last week alone, in Ontario, the Ontario Liberal Party has gained 7% support, from 20% to 27%. They surpassed the NDP, who were polling in second place, only just behind the Conservatives, and the Conservatives lost 6%. They're still in first place, but they lost 6% support. All of the support has gone to either non-associated party members or the Liberal Party. It's mind-blowing how basically this one group and the rhetoric that the Liberals put on them has destroyed the Conservative parties. They have no idea how to react to this because they don't know how to politic in a digital world like the Liberals do, like Trudeau knows how to. It's something that the Liberals are so good at. They can put rhetoric on groups and spread news. True, right? It's absolutely true. What the negative things they've said about this protest group are absolutely true, right? They did all that fucked up stuff. They have been messing up. If you live in Ottawa, like I was talking to someone from Ottawa just 2 days ago, and she was telling me that her friends, she doesn't live there anymore, but her friends who are there can't go to work. Like, literally, they can't go to work. One girl she knows works at a store in the mall and cannot, like, the mall's just closed. There's no work for like a week now. If you work downtown, even in the Parliament buildings, they're working from home. Some places, right, are able to work from home, but storefronts and whatnot are just closed. They can't open because it's just gridlocked and shut down for like a week now. That's really bad. But the Liberals have done something that is so powerful without actually doing anything. They just said, oh yeah, rapists and murderers and and Nazis, and look, that's them. Do you really support them? And then the conservatives go, oh, no, we don't, no, we're not like that, no. And then what? The only option is for the conservatives to either say or do nothing, which is what they're doing, or agree with the liberals, which will win liberals' votes, right? Because politically you can't be like, yeah, that guy's right. You can't do that. So it just leaves them in a position where they can't do anything. And now you have an election coming in 5 months, actually 5 months to the day that this podcast posts, right? June 2nd. And the Conservative Party of Ontario can't say anything about vaccines for their position without being associated with this group because they have no idea how to differentiate themselves. And the longer they wait, the worse it gets. They could have come out right from the beginning and been like, we do not agree with what they are doing, but here is our vaccine mandate policy or whatever that we're putting forward. But they didn't. They just said nothing because they're so afraid of being associated. Because guilt by association is punishable by death nowadays on the internet. And for some reason, the conservatives just buy right into that, even though their voters don't. You know what I mean? Like, we talk about different types of voters here on the show all the time, and it's pretty obvious that the majority of conservative voters don't buy into the internet, that internet base of society and and those societal norms of today, but they act like they do. And then it's no wonder why they are failing to succeed on a national level. It's like, it's really no wonder why this is happening. And, you know, actually, I'm just looking right now because a federal poll just came out as I'm recording from Western provinces, the prairies, where conservatives do overwhelmingly well. And since the protests started, the conservatives have been dropping off and the liberals are coming up because people aren't hearing anything from the conservatives. They're just not saying anything. It's like if you ask them what their position is, they go, we're working on it. And they don't say anything. And what that causes voters to do is think, you don't know what's going on. You have no idea what your own opinion is. But in reality, it's just that they're afraid to give it because they don't want to be associated with this group of protesters who support them. So, yeah, it's such an odd place to be. I don't exactly know how you get here as a political party. I think it's comical. I've been laughing about it, honestly, like straight up laughing about it, because the liberals are so good at what they do that, to me, it's just like, man, it reminds me, and I say this all the time, in the U.S., the Republicans know how to politic. The Democrats don't. Here in Canada, the liberals know how to politic, and the conservatives don't. And it's so obvious. And people looking at this won't see what I see, but I'm telling you, this is one of the most shrewd political moves I've seen maybe in my entire life, where the liberals are able to identify this group before they even get to Ottawa. Say that's a group of racists and white supremacists and rapists and murderers and all this shit. And they get there, and you could go anywhere. You can go to a Willie Nelson concert and find a Nazi flag who might be or likely is flown by someone who's trolling, but they're everywhere, right? It's gonna show up a group of people being disruptive. You're gonna find someone who's like, yeah, let's wave the Nazi flag, who's probably never even read Mein Kampf and has no fucking idea what the flag means and what they're doing. They just know it upsets people, so that's why they wave it around. To be perfectly honest with you, but nonetheless, the liberals know that's going to happen. So they identify the group ahead of time. They label them all over the internet and the media as such, knowing that this group's position matches the position of their opposition. And the liberals never had to say anything about the conservative government they never had in Ontario, or about the Conservative Party federally, but they made both shut the fuck up because now both parties can't say anything because they don't know how to counterpunch in this digital world, in this labeled, segregated, I guess you could say, world. They have no idea what to do. And it is hilarious to watch because the Conservatives should have no trouble in the next provincial election here in Ontario, and suddenly they're having a ton of trouble because they're not allowed to talk. And it's going to happen. You're going to see eventually this protest will break up, probably in the next... Oh, by the way, protesters were raiding soup kitchens trying to get food. So they're not going to last much longer because they've got no money. But they have no support. Like, there's no finances involved in this. How are they supposed to keep eating? So this is going to fall apart very soon. The problem is, when the Conservatives are asked about their position, it's going to match this group. And then you're going to have Liberal and NDP and Green Party candidates in the Ontario provincial election who are challenging Doug Ford and saying, isn't that exactly what that group thinks? And Doug Ford is going to have an answer. But the problem is, because he didn't denounce the group and say that, different people can have similar objectives, but we don't believe the same thing. We do think we should roll back some vaccine mandates, but this is a federal issue. He could have just done one of those where it's like, this actually isn't a provincial issue, and gone on with his day and been totally successful and still been able to talk about it without being associated with that group. But because he never did that, now he will forever be associated with that group, because he didn't successfully pull himself away. And the same thing can be said about Erin O'Toole or whoever ends up being the Conservative Party leader, because that's falling apart right now. And I'm telling you, it's going to come up, and they're going to have no response. And this probably is the only way that the Conservatives don't win Ontario. The only way is on this issue, which... No one's going to talk about this trucking group, but that's the catalyst. This is a canary in the coal mine moment where you are seeing the Conservative Party doesn't know how to deal with their own supporters acting like fools, right? Whereas the Liberal Party has been very good at it. They just pretend nothing happens and they say, what? I'm sorry, what? Didn't hear you. What? Whereas the Conservatives try to be all, which is what you do on the internet. That's how you get away with it. And the Conservatives are trying to be all warm and family-oriented and answer your questions. And it just does not work in these circumstances. And it's going to come back to haunt them. Anyways, that's all we've got for this week. Thank you guys for tuning into the episode. Consistently charting in Canada. So thank you. A lot of people listening to old episodes. So if you're listening to this, you've made it to the end, shout out to you. But feel free to go back and check out old episodes. One of my old episodes had like 30 downloads last week. And I was like, I don't know why. I don't know how that happens. I don't advertise them. Nothing. But the same episode had over 30 different people download it. So shout out to those people. And thank you for your continued support. I hope you have a fantastic day, week, month, and year. And yeah, shout out to everyone. We'll be back, of course, each and every Wednesday afternoon, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You can follow me on my social media links. They're in the description down below. You know what to do, though. Hit that subscribe button if you have yet to do so. Tell your friends and family about the podcast, word of mouth, or post online. It's all good. You know what I mean? It's all good. We're doing exceptionally well. I've used the word exceptional way too many times on this episode. So for one last go, I hope you have an exceptional week. Don't forget to keep washing your hands, keep wearing those masks, keep socially distancing, keep getting vaccinated, keep avoiding downtown Ottawa. Keep on laughing and keep on learning.